Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Megan Ellis. I'm here with your frevvo customer success team. I've also got Wendy and Courtney from our customer success team on the line, and they'll help answer some questions. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. We're going to talk today about visually creating dynamic forms and customizing the logic in your forms using some of the frevvo built-in tools. So with that, we'll dive right in. So we're going to spend a very quick overview. I recognize several names of folks on here, so I know a lot of you are current customers, but we'll do a quick overview of frevvo for anyone who might not be familiar. And then we are going to demo in the product how to build some of those, some of the custom logic using our visual rule builder. In the meantime, if you have questions, you should have a questions panel on your GoToWebinar toolbar there. Go ahead and type questions at any time. Courtney and Wendy are standing by to answer questions, and then we'll answer questions live at the end as well. So just a quick introduction to frevvo. We are a simple workflow software, 100% visual tools. So great drag and drop tools. It's really easy for the average, business user to design and manage forms and workflows with this tool. You really don't need IT. If you can use Excel, you can automate your business processes. We have hundreds of customers across several different verticals, from education to government. Lots of different types of businesses use frevvo. You can see a list of a few of our customers here on the screen. And those customers use frevvo for a lot of different tasks, everything from a new hire onboarding. If you think about that process and how many forms a new employee must fill out, wouldn't it be great if they can fill all of that out on a tablet even, without having to duplicate information from form to form. And then what frevvo can do is give you a printout of all the custom PDFs that you might need to send in as tax forms, or that your company may need to have branded. So it looks really nice. It's really convenient for the user. We also see a lot of customers using this for business processes like purchase orders or invoice approvals, and other HR processes, vacation requests, timesheet, expense reports. So the possibilities are never ending. We don't even have listed here some of our educational functions where we use it for class registration, add drop. There's all kinds of great opportunities with frevvo. It is a complete enterprise grade software. So today we're going to be zeroing in a little bit on the visual business logic that you see towards the middle of that list. But just notice that there are lots of other great features that you'll want to explore and make the most out of your forms and workflows using frevvo. So today we are going to focus on dynamic forms, so customizing that form behavior without coding. We know that you don't always have the time or the team to be able to do a lot of programming behind the scenes. So we've provided visual tools that help you implement this complex logic into your forms without needing coding. We're going to be looking today at our visual rule builder, which is going to allow you to do some of these common tasks without any coding. So today we'll be looking at 7 common use cases. These are pretty simple use cases. You can actually get really quite complex with frevvo's visual rule builder and also our rule editor. So there's a lot more you can do, but this will give you just a general idea and a jumping off point of the type of custom logic that you can create. The visual rule builder has built-in functions. So we'll use functions to capture user information, to parse a text string, mathematical functions, and also date and time functions. We'll look at examples of each of these. And we also make use of pretty standard operators so that you can create expressions that are meaningful and useful in your logic. All right, so let's come out of the slide deck and we'll actually go right into frevvo and start looking at some of these examples. So I'm here in the Forms and Workflows homepage. I'm logged in as a designer user, and I've prepped about 7 examples to show you guys today. So the first one we'll look at is very simple. We want to just initialize this form with today's date. So we have a date control here that you can see. Now, the way we got this date control onto the canvas is we grabbed the date from the palette over here, and we just dragged and dropped it onto the canvas. From here, you can edit what the label says, you can change how big it is, you can even edit the whether or not it has the little calendar decorator or not. So I'll delete that one. I just wanted to show you how we got to this point. And we're gonna go now to the, actually I just wanna show you something on this control. This has a label, today's date, which looks nice. It has the apostrophe and the capitalization for the user. But we also have, the control has a name, and this name is what we're going to use when we look at the business rules. So just notice that it has no spaces or special characters. Frevvo automatically generated that name for me when I provided the label, but you can also give, you could edit that to whatever name you want to use that makes sense for you. So we're here in the form designer. We're actually going to come over to the rules editor by clicking the rules icon at the top. And then let's add a rule using this blue plus icon. We can give that rule a name and a little description. So we'll say, automatically pre-fill today's date. This form is only going to have one rule, but your forms may have several or even dozens of rules. So the description can be helpful when you're trying to look at your list of rules later and figure out what each one does. Now we're going to use the rule builder. So all we do is click run builder and this wizard pops up. Now the first screen on the wizard is a condition. In this case, we want to always populate the date with today's date when the form loads. So we'll check initialization rule only, and we don't need to set a specific condition. Then we'll click next. And this next page is the actions page. So this is where we're actually going to fill that date field. So I select today's date from the drop-down menu, and this is a type ahead as well. So let me just delete that, and I'll just show you. If you can't quite remember the name of your field, you can just type ahead, and this list will narrow down to matching options. Then we're going to select the operation. And for this, it's quite simple. We just want to set that field to an expression. And then for the expression, we'll use, let's go back to this expressions list. We'll use one of our date and time functions called today, which will capture the current date. Now, this expression does not need any parameters, so we just close the parens behind it. And if you had a condition, you would also use this third screen to add an else action. In our case, with an initialization rule and no condition, there's nothing to do. There's no false state, so there's nothing to do in this screen. So we can just click finish. And then let's test the form. And just notice that it opens here in a nice test window. You can see that today's date was automatically populated when this form opened. And just a couple other little things to point out while we're on this test screen. Below the form, when you're in test mode, you get a debug console. And this is going to show you which rule ran. So it's using your name, the rule name that you set. It'll tell you what the trigger was, any dependencies. In this case, initialization gives us the form load equals true dependency. And then it'll show you how the rule evaluated and what value was set. This can be really helpful, and I'll show you in a little bit that our rule builder, it actually will catch errors for you right while you're building the rule before you get to this point. But sometimes you, especially when you're building complex forms, there may not be a true JavaScript error, but there's maybe a logic error. And so the form doesn't behave the way you want, and you can go and look at this debug console to see what values were set and based off what rules. So it is really helpful. If there is a true error, this will show it up it'll show up here in the debug console in red text. Also, you probably know this, but you can test your form in tablet mode and in mobile view, which doesn't really have anything to do with business rules, but I just like to show you that these forms are nice and responsive, and you can check out how they look in all views. All right, let's save and close that form. Our next example is kind of similar, but now instead of just initializing the date, we also want to initialize with the logged in user's details. So as long as your user is a frevvo user and they're logged in when they fill out your form, frevvo can actually capture their name, email address, manager ID, and a few other details as well that we're not showing here. So what we've done is we've dragged a couple of text controls from the palette for first name and last name. We've also dragged an email type control from the palette for email address, which if you were letting your users enter data into this, it would validate that it is in fact a valid email address. And the manager, which in this case is just a text field. So let's pop over to the rules and see what that looks like. So I've already added the rule, or started to add the rule for us. Again, we've given it a name and a description. This is another initialization rule. And when we have a rule that's already built and we want to edit it, all we have to do is click one of these pencil icons. So just to show you, again, we have no condition except for that it's an initialization rule. And I've selected already our first name and last name controls, and I've set them to these user functions, which if we look over here, you can see those in this first column. Let's come back here. And by just closing the parens and leaving it empty, this is going to capture the information for the currently logged in user. So let's add two more, and we'll capture the user's email address. Whoops. We'll set email to. And again, just by typing ahead, I get a list of functions here that matches, and I can select the correct one. It'll give me some detailed information about what this should look like. We'll close that parens and click away, and the little error icon goes away telling me that that rule is valid. We'll do the same thing for manager. This is going to capture the user's manager ID, and this can be very helpful when you are designing workflows. Let's say you have a workflow where the employee is going to fill out the first step and the manager is going to fill out, approve it in the second step. You don't want it to go to just one generic manager. You want it to go to that employee's specific manager dynamically based on whoever filled out the first step. So by capturing the manager ID, we can then dynamically route the workflow later. So that's very helpful. Again, in this case, we don't need any else actions. And so we'll finish that rule. You can see that the summary shows right here for you. Now, if you wanted to, you can actually click rule code and you can see the code that is generated for you. So what's really nice is that with this rule builder, you don't have to really know JavaScript or be able to write code like this. We're doing it for you, but you could always just go in and check or even edit it if you needed to. Just a little reminder on that. If you go from your rule builder to editing code, it is a one-way operation. So if I clicked edit code here, I would not be able to then go back and edit using the rule builder. So it's a one-way from builder to code. So usually I'll leave things in the rule builder unless I really need to edit that JavaScript for some reason. Let's go ahead and test this form and see how that works. There we go. You can see that all of my user details have been initialized, filled in for me. And this saves you a lot of time. It really saves your users a lot of time. They don't have to enter information if frevvo already knows that information. Now, you could use a similar concept to pre-fill forms from a database using the frevvo database connector, or a Google Sheet using the frevvo Google connector. There's a lot of ways to do that that can help not only save your users time, but also improve the accuracy by, you know, the name and the email will always be spelled correctly if you know you're pulling it in from another source. Alrighty. I do see a little question about initialization rule. The initialization rule, it basically, if we set that, it sets it to run on form load. So it does run once when the form is loaded. I think that was the question. All right, we'll save and close that. And now let's look at a couple of mathematical examples. Or actually, let's first look at a string example. So in this example, we want to take first name and last name and concatenate them to create a full name. Now, this is actually kind of a funny example because frevvo can pull in the full name from the user details, you might have noticed, but just to show you how concatenation works, we'll do this. This is something you may want to do, like let's say you're doing an employee onboarding workflow, and you want to capture the first and last name separately because that's the way you store your data. But on your W4 form, that PDF wants you to fill in a single field with first name and last name, you know, as a full name. So in that case, we're going to concatenate that those two fields into one, and then this full name would be what we write to the PDF, the W4 form. So that's one example of why you might need concatenation. We've got today's date and user details that we already created earlier. So now we're going to say set full name, and we'll say concatenate first and last names to set the full name. Let's go ahead and run the builder. Now, this is a case where you could use conditions. Maybe you only want to do this if first and last name are filled. But for today, we'll just skip the condition. We're going to show you conditions a little later because if first and last name aren't filled, this will just be blank. So then we're going to select the full name control. We'll set the operation to 2. And then for the expression, you can also reference fields in your form in this expression. So I'm just going to start typing first name. And notice how under the functions list, I also have a fields list, and that first name field is listed here. So I'm going to grab that, and actually I missed a step, so I'm going to go back. First, we need to use the concatenation function. So just start typing that, and the concatenation function will come up in the list for you. Now, concatenation takes any number of expressions here, any number of parameters separated by a comma. So now we'll grab that first name. That's going to be the first parameter that we want. We'll do the comma. We would like to have a space between our first and last name, so we'll put a space in quotation marks and another comma. And then let's look up the last name field, grabbing that from the drop-down list. And then we'll close the parens to close the function. And when we click away, it will validate that, and any error will go away. Now, if you had a condition again, you could set an else action, but we don't need to. So we'll just click finish, and let's test it out. There we go. So my first name and last name were pre-filled because of the user initialization rule. And my full name has been concatenated with a little space in between. All set there. Very handy tools to save your users time. All right, now we are going to look at a few math functions. So let's first look at how we could calculate subtotals in a table. So on this form, I've now added a table control. Again, this is something I grabbed from the palette. And the table control takes almost any other controls as columns. So you can see I have this first column is actually a text field for description. This is sort of like you can imagine a purchase order items table. The second field is a quantity type field, which is going to take a whole number. The unit price is actually a money field type, or control type, which is going to display what's entered with 2 decimal places, like a money format. And then the subtotal is also a money field, but notice on this subtotal column, it's grayed out, and I have this enabled box unchecked. And that's because we are going to calculate the subtotal using a business rule, and we don't want the users editing it. But we do want them to be able to see it and kind of see what's going on behind the scenes there. So we'll go over to our business rules, and let's open a new rule. We'll say calculate subtotal. And we'll run our builder. Now, in this case, we do want to add a condition. We only want to calculate that subtotal when both quantity and price are filled. Otherwise, we're either going to see a 0, or we might even see a little error, like not a number, because there isn't any numbers for it to calculate. So we'll say quantity, and then we'll select this built-in operator for is filled. So you don't even have to know anything fancy about how to code that. We just give you the operator there. We'll also select that unit price is filled. And then notice at the bottom here, the logic expression. We do want this to run when both 1 and 2 are true. There might be other types of conditions where you want to use an or condition, or maybe you have multiple conditions and you want some really custom logic here. So you can edit that logic if you need to. But for today, 1 and 2 will work for us. So we'll save that and click next. And then we're going to say to set the subtotal field 2, again, using that simple 2. And here we're going to use, if we look over at our operators, we'll see that the operator for multiplication is just a star. So just like we did with first and last name, we're going to search in here for controls in our form, quantity. Then we'll use the star operator, and then we'll search for the control unit price, and that validates fine. Now, if the condition that we set here, if this is false, we actually want to set that subtotal to empty. So we'll say subtotal, and we can just start typing empty here, and we'll find this built-in operator for, or operation for empty, and then we'll click finish. So you can see your rule summary here. Now, these fields are in a table, which is actually technically a repeat control. So if we look at the rule code, you'll notice that this creates the for loop and the item added and all of that a code for us. So you don't have to worry about any of that when you use the rule builder, which is one reason that we really like it for this type of calculation. Let's go ahead and test that form. And we'll just type in a little information here. And you can see that the subtotal is automatically calculated for us. And the prices are automatically set as money, and same as the subtotal, and the calculations are all done. So, and it does that for each row that you enter. Really handy. Now I can't edit the subtotal if you remember that that is disabled, but we can see that the subtotal was calculated correctly. Now, if you're calculating a subtotal, chances are you also will want to calculate a grand total. What is the total of all of those, that entire subtotal column? So in this example, we've added a grand total field down here. This is another money type field, and it also is disabled, just like before. Now notice that I have stuck it over here on the right side of the of the canvas because I kind of like for that total to be underneath the row that it's calculating. The way that I did that is I added a message control with no text and no message type, and that created a sort of an invisible spacer in my canvas, so I can rearrange my controls and set them where I want them on the canvas. Now let's go to the business rule. We'll add a new rule to calculate the grand total. And again, on this, we don't need any condition. We want to always calculate that grand total. So we'll go ahead and skip the condition. We'll find the grand total field. Oops. Set it to. And in this case, we will use one of our mathematical functions, which is sum. So we type in sum. That function opens for us, and it gives us, again, a little bit of idea of how we should enter this. In this case, we just want to sub everything in the subtotal column. And even though you might have multiple rows, you don't have to worry about that here. The visual rule builder, again, is going to write the for loop for this subtotal that happens to be in a table repeat. We don't need a false condition. So we'll go ahead and, there we go, and finish that rule. And then let's test it. So again, we'll enter a little bit of data here. You can see that my subtotal calculates and my grand total calculates. And then as I add additional rows, additional calculations appear. And if I change a price, perhaps, you can see that the grand total automatically updates. If I delete a row, again, the grand total automatically updates to reflect that. So all of this is happening automatically behind the scenes, no math for your users to do. Imagine how great this is. I mean, how many times have you gotten a form submitted and there's a mathematical error and it ends up going back and forth trying to fix that, or it ends up being really messy. So this is all calculated for them. Let frevvo do the math for you. Let's go ahead and save that form. And now let's look at a couple of examples where we actually want to show and hide the controls that are on the form. So this can be very helpful when your users have sort of different options or different tracks they can take on the form, and they don't need to see information that isn't relevant to their work or what they're trying to do with that form. So you can really streamline the form and clean it up for them and reduce the number of decisions that they have to make while they're filling out that form. So in this case, we've asked the user for a payment method, check or credit card. This is our radio control. And if I look here into the properties of this radio button, you'll see that I have options here. And the option syntax is value on the left and then a little equal sign, except if you move things around like I just did, value on the left equals the label on the right. So, you know, you could make this label say anything that you want, and it would look like this, but the value behind the scenes is always going to be check. So that's helpful to know when you're writing business rules because it's the value that you will reference. Then we have a message control here, which is a read-only control. It gives the user some information about where to send their check. And then we also have a credit card section, which a section is sort of a group of other controls. And here we're asking for the credit card holder name and email. So what we want to do clearly is when the payment method is check, we want to show the check message. And when it's credit card, we want to show the credit card info. So let's go over to the business rules. And I actually pre-built this rule because it has several actions, and I wanted to make sure that I would remember to show them all to you. But we'll go ahead and we'll write our own rule as well. So we'll say we want to show and hide payment info. Then we'll run our builder. And in this case, our condition is going to run on that payment method field. So when the payment method is, and instead of an expression here, I'm going to change this to a literal value. And I'm going to use the value of that radio control for check. So when the payment method is check, we want to perform these actions. We want the check info message to be visible. So again, we have this whole list of operators. We're going to just select from that drop-down visible. We also will want the credit card info section to be hidden. And we want that credit card info section to also be not required. So we'll set it as optional. If it's hidden, and required, our users may run into a problem where they can't submit the form. So we want to set it to optional. Now, there also may be a case where a user picks credit card, fills out the name and email, and then changes their mind and clicks check. In that case, of course, we want to erase the name and email that they entered. So what we'll do here is we'll add 2 more actions to set the credit card holder name and email to empty on this condition where payment info is check. Now, in this case, we do in fact need false or else actions. So we're going to add, if it is not check, then it's credit. In this case, our radio control only has 2 options. So this is a very simple if else statement. So if it's not check, then it's credit, and we're going to have the check info message hidden and the credit info visible. And in that case, we also want the credit info to be required. Now, we don't need to do anything here about to oppose the empty because the user will fill out these fields. So we'll finish that, and you can see the rule summary here. We'll just double check that it looks like my original one, and I think it does. So now I'm going to actually delete this old rule. So you can see on any rule, you have a little action menu, and here's where you can delete it. You could also disable it, which is often really helpful when you're troubleshooting. If you find some kind of a logic bug, you might disable your rules and then re-enable them one at a time to see which rule is causing the problem. And you can move your rules around using these little arrows, or even simply by dragging and dropping them elsewhere in your rule list. So in this case, I want to delete my old check and credit info rule, and we'll keep the new one. We'll run this rule, or we'll run this form. And I'm just going to skip entering all that information, and we can see that when send a check is selected as the payment method, I see my check message. When credit card is selected, I see this. I can enter my name and email. And then if I change my mind and click send a check, that credit info goes away and the check message comes back. And just to make sure that our rule to set those name and email fields to empty worked, let's go back to credit card, and you can see once again they are empty. Now, one other really common use case for showing and hiding controls is actually for workflows. So whenever you have a workflow, like an approval workflow, for example, this one is initialized by a requester, and then it is sent to a manager for approval, and then a VP for approval. The form may have manager and VP approval sections on it. Now, the requester does not need to see those when they're filling it out. They only really need to see those fields that are relevant to their work. And at the same time, the manager may actually prefer to see this information collapsed. So it's a little less, things to look at when he opens the form. So you can see we've got almost all the same controls that we had on our earlier forms, but we've now put them inside sections. And we've also named those sections with helpful templates. So what I've done here is you see these curly braces around the syntax first name and last name, which if you recall are the names of the first name and last name controls. What this will do is it'll fill those with the runtime data. So at runtime, when this fills in with, Megan Ellis, the name of the section will now be requester Megan Ellis. So when we get to the manager step and we have this section collapsed, it will still show the manager some relevant information without him having to look at all of this detail. So let's see. We want to, so if we look at the rules, by the way, we actually built this workflow using our workflow design wizard. We can throw in a documentation link there that has about a 2-minute video for how to create a brand new workflow. But when you create a workflow in Frevvo that's an approval workflow, we automatically add rules for you. And the rules that we add do some cool stuff on each step. So on the manager step, we're going to set that manager approval section to expanded, required, and enabled. And on any other section, either before or after, we're going to set it to collapsed, optional, and disabled. Now we also want to set its visibility and printable properties, but we only want to do those on or after the approval step. So if we look in here and we dive deeper into this condition, you'll see that we have a current step is one of our condition options. And we can say that it is not, it is on or after, or it is on or before. In this case, if the step is on or after manager, we want to set that manager approval section to visible and printable. Otherwise, if it's on any step before that, it should be hidden and not printable. So that is going to control that behavior for our manager section. And then we have 2 very similar rules that control the behavior for the VP step. You can check those out here. And again, really handy, Frevvo built these for us, so we didn't have to build them. But if you were building from scratch and you wanted to create these rules, you can do that as well. Now, we're going to edit a couple of these rules. The first rule we want to edit is actually this, let's see, this on or after approval step manager. So in addition to setting the manager section as visible and printable, we also want to set these, the requester section and the order info section to collapsed. So we'll come to this rule, we'll edit it. And then we're going to add 2 new conditions. We're going to pick the requester section. And we'll say collapsed. And we're going to select the order info section. And we'll say collapsed. And then on our else actions, so anytime we're before the manager step, we can let those be expanded. All right, so that takes care of the collapse and expand. Now, there's one other little edit we want to do here, which is, I'm going to take a look at our workflow real quick. Notice that this workflow has a yellow step, which is actually a precondition. We only want to perform the VP step if the total is equal or greater than 5,000. Now, the precondition builder works very similar to the condition page on the visual rule builder. So again, we've selected a control, an operator, and in this case, the literal value 5,000. Now, let's say we had an additional step here, and I'll just use our add step wizard really quick to add a finance step. I'm going to leave the assignment to none just so I can demonstrate this workflow for you. If we skip the VP step, We don't want the finance person to see the VP approval because they would have to, the signature would be required. And so that finance person would be like, well, how, I can't sign for the VP, you know, and now I can't complete the flow because I have this required control showing up on my form. So what we'll do is we'll come back over to our rules and we'll create a rule on the VP section that matches the precondition. So where we are setting the visibility, actually, let's do this here where we're setting it to, well, we'll do it on both steps. So where we're setting the required property, we're going to add a condition for grand total. And if we've selected a math field, we're going to get operations for equal or more than, equal or less than. We'll say equal or more than. Pick a literal value and type in 5,000. And now this rule is going to run if the step is finance and the grand total is more than 5,000. And we'll just do the same thing for the on or after step. Make a matching rule to that precondition. Finish. You can see the summary here. Check out the rule code if you're interested in it. All right. And now I'm just going to double check that I don't have any assignments here, and we'll run this workflow to show you how that works. That's fine. Good. Okay. So we'll test this workflow. Again, we've got all our pre-fill rules, so a lot of my information is pre-filled. We'll just add a few orders. For this first one, we'll do something that's less than 5,000. And so I can sign this section because I'm a logged in user and we've added a signature to it. We'll click continue. Now, typically the manager would get an approval, or sorry, they would get a task notification email and they would be able to click a link to approve this task. But I've set this up today so I can show it to you all in one window. So I'm going to say, okay, looks good. And you can see here that the request and order info sections are collapsed, but our templates are showing me the critical information I need to know. And of course, I can just expand that section if I wanted to look in at the details. Sign that again and we'll continue. Now you can see here we have skipped the VP step because of the precondition we built. We're on the finance step. And because we skipped the VP step and our business rule included that grand total condition, we don't see the we actually do see it, which is weird. I might have made a little error in my rule, but we'll go ahead and finish that. And yes, so actually this might be a good example. I clearly have a little rule bug. Let's take a look here. There's my finance. Oh, I know what my bug is. I put my condition on the wrong step. So that was a good little experience, right? I put this on the finance step, and what I meant to do is put it on the VP step. So sometimes you will run into things like that, and that's where it is so nice to have this visual rule builder because it's really easy to just go in and quickly edit that. Sorry about that, guys, but sometimes it is good to show that kind of thing. So we'll do that here. Now, just for time's sake, I won't go through and demo that again, but you can see how that would work. Typically, what you would see on that finance step is the finance section based on this rule and not the VP section. All right, so that is all of the 7 examples I wanted to show you. So we looked at a few initialization examples, we looked at a few mathematical examples, and we looked at showing and hiding fields both on individual forms and for workflow routing. And so I just wanted to point you guys to a couple of other resources. Our documentation has several tutorials which walk you through using all the different features in Frevvo, including writing some of these types of business rules and seeing them, how they function in a real workflow. We've also got video demos on our website that are really handy. I especially recommend this workflow design quick start, which is 17 minutes, short little videos that walk you through all of this cool stuff. You can check out our ROI analysis on our website if you're considering purchasing. We also have case studies that show how other customers have used frevvo forms and workflows and been successful with it. And then our website also has templates or pre-built forms and workflows. You can try them online. You just click this try button and you're going to get to fill out that workflow and see how it works. And these are going to use similar business rules behind the scenes so you can see what kind of custom logic is possible with frevvo. So that concludes our webinar, but I would like to take some questions. Wendy or Courtney, did we have any questions that we want to answer?
Hey, Megan. So we did have a couple questions that I think would be good just to share with the group. Somebody was asking about how to connect data to a database, which I know isn't directly related to the rule builder, but it does bring up the other method of adding custom logic to your form, which is through our JavaScript editor. I don't know, I joined a little bit late, so I apologize if we've already gone over this. But maybe could we show a little bit about how people can add custom logic without the rule builder, and maybe what types of rules?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll just jump into one of our forms here. So if you did not want to use the rule builder, we'll just add a new rule for this. You can actually click rule code and edit code, and then you can write your own JavaScript rules right here. So sometimes you may want to do that. If you have, for example, a switch case with more than an if and else action. So you have if, else if, and then else. The rule builder can only handle one switch. So for a multi-switch, what's the word I'm looking for? Switch case scenario, you may want to use the JavaScript. Now, we actually have in our documentation, and we can get you a link for this as well, we have a whole page with probably, I don't know, 100 rule examples here of how to do a variety of different rules using both the builder or JavaScript for the more complex ones. So let's see. Here's an example of a multiple choice, right? So we have if, else if, and this is done using JavaScript. So what's handy about this is even if you're not a JavaScript expert, you can copy and paste from our rule examples and then just edit it a little bit for the controls and cases that are in your form. And then in terms of the database connector, there's also some pretty extensive documentation on that, including, let's go down here, a tutorial which will show you how to write business rules that pull information from the database connector. So here, it'll have examples of that business rule, and it basically is running an HTTP GET and then populating your form.
Great. There was also a question on the initialization checkbox in the rule builder. And I don't know if you went over that, but if you are using the rule builder to create a rule, you have that option to check off the initialization only. Maybe just going over that doesn't mean that, well, what it does mean is that rule will only run when the form loads and not when some value in this rule changes. So just there was a question on that.
Exactly. Yeah. It just basically sets this form load condition for you.
Yep. Okay. Can you use a business rule to populate a table from a text field? So yeah, so what I would say is if you have a question about what type of rule you're trying to write, I would always go to the rules examples page first and see if we have a use case already fleshed out. We have lots of examples there. And there are examples of how to populate values in a table. And those values can either come from other table controls or from other controls in your form itself, text fields, state fields, that sort of thing. But there is a very specific way to do that. The rule examples page, Megan, have you shown this to everybody yet?
I just showed it in the last question, and then I popped the link to this into the chat so you guys can check it out yourself as well.
It may be helpful if you could expand that menu. So the first half of that menu is really based on what you're trying to do. And then the second half of the menu gets more specific into what type of controls are you working with. So there's a whole section there on repeat controls, populating values in tables, and repeat sections. I think it's under dates and times.
Yep, there's repeats,
repeats
and tables.
Yep. So I would say that that is a good spot to go to there. Okay.
Super.
And then let's see, some questions about, we're making you jump around here, but can you fill different forms from a parent form? So can you use data from one form to initialize another form in the same workflow? Absolutely. That gets into data merging. So that actually requires no business rules. Let's say you have form 1 in your workflow, and there's a field called first name. As long as that field is in form B and it is named the same and has the same, like it's at the same level, whether that's in a section or outside of a section, the data when it's entered in form A will just merge into form B. So Megan will pop that in there as well.
Yeah, sorry, here we go.
No, you're good. And so then there's a question going back to the database. Let's see. I'd like to use the forms to store data in a local database, then push them to a cloud database if I lose internet connectivity. Is that possible with the forms? So here's what's possible with the frevvo database connector. You're able to either write a business rule or use our doc-URI approach, which automates the pull, the read or write of data. So you can either do that through a business rule or through our doc-URI. And those are what that connector does is it points, or in either method, I should say, it's going to point to the server where you've installed the database connector. The database connector is an installable item, and wherever it lives there, that's where we reference in our business rule. So I don't know, Keith, if that answers your question on that. Okay, I think that is it. And then I think a good thing, Megan, maybe to, okay, hold on, sorry, there's some more questions here. Can you use a business rule to populate table formats? So yeah, I mean, Rita, we can show you, we can point you to a couple of the examples here. We don't have any examples like queued up I don't want to put Megan on the spot to have to write JavaScript code. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a specific question or example, then we can point you to kind of the start here. And then with any of your workflows or forms, you have access to our support channel. But then for more specific questions, like here's my form, here's the rule I want to write, can you help us to implement it? We do have our services group that can engage with you on a one-to-one basis with a screen share. So for those of you who aren't yet customers, we do offer that service as well to help you write your custom JavaScript rules. So that may be an option there. Okay, I think that is it. And you already demonstrated there was also a question on what does it mean when my rule is bright pink? But you showed that.
You know what? Let's just show it really quick here. So you know, if I did something in my form, like maybe I changed the name of my control from today's date to date, and then I go back over to my rules, I'm going to see that it's highlighted in this pink color. And that just tells me there's some kind of error in there. There's two ways you can look at what that error is. If it's a rule builder rule, you'll get these little alert icons to tell you where the error is. And the other way you can look is in your rule code, has a little debugger on the bottom. And so this is telling me exactly where in the rule the problem is and what it is. So it's saying, I don't know the name of this control today's date. And that's because I renamed it. So to fix it, we'll come in and we'll just change that to the new control name. And then my function that I had written is still there. And the rule is happy again. Awesome. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending. Again, our contact info is up here on the screen, so please do reach out to us. We did record this session, so we will send that recording out afterwards, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thanks so much. Have a great day.